been studying David's life from the Old Testament book of 2 Samuel. David and his supporters have fled Jerusalem, allowing his son Absalom's rebellion to succeed and take over Israel. We now check in on Absalom to see what he's been up to, and sadly to say, it's not good, but he had some help at it. Hi, I'm Ken Goodevinus, and this is Digging for Scriptural Gems. Tonight, we're studying 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 15 to 23. Absalom, all his men, and Ahithophel entered Jerusalem. Ahithophel was formerly a counselor to David, but changed his mind to support Absalom. You may remember him as Bathsheba's grandfather. You'll also remember Hushai, that wanted to go with David, but David sent him back to Absalom to be his eyes and ears and to get word to David of what was going on back in Jerusalem. Well, Hushai goes to Absalom and greets him with a "Long live the king, long live the king." Absalom, surprised, asks, "Is this how you're being loyal to your friend David? Why didn't you go with him?" And Hushai very quickly responds by saying he would support and remain with whomever the Lord, the people, and all the men of Israel chose. Plus, he assured him that he wanted to serve him as he had served David. He wanted to serve David's son as he had served David. Now, it's not clear as to whether or not Absalom bought the story, but nevertheless, the matter is dropped. Seems like Hushai gets to stick around. And now Absalom turns to Ahithophel and asks, "Okay, guys, what should we do?" Pointing the question primarily to the older advisor. The old man tells him to go into and have sex with his father's concubines so that all Israel will know that he has become repulsive and is making himself repulsive to his father, and that the relationship is over. And then all will be encouraged and strengthened by that. And if that's not enough, a tent was pitched for Absalom on the rooftop of the palace so he could sleep with the concubines before all of Israel's sight. The last verse of chapter 16, verse 23, tells us that Ahithophel's advice in those days was deemed to have been equivalent to someone asking for the advice or the word of God, or as valuable a prophetic revelation, both for David and Absalom, who regarded his advice very, very highly. We're going to stop there and try to see what the passage is telling us. We first note the wisdom and persuasiveness of Hushai. Although he was well known for his admiration and commitment to David, he was able to convince Absalom of his future loyalty and thus was able to stay alive and in the service of the new king. We need friends like that, but these days they are few and far between. If you have one, my advice to you is to treat them well. Of course, Absalom sleeping with the concubines that David had left behind to take care of his house in his absence would outright humiliate them, and that was the point. Not only would this show how much Absalom hated his father and was free of him, but also his desire to make life difficult for anyone who still had anything to do with David. This was the ultimate sign of broken relationships, to sleep with someone else's wives. There were supposedly to be no means of healing of this kind of breach once that happened. Once this had been created between father and son, nothing would heal that in the eyes of Israel and in the eyes of Ahithophel. And sadly, infidelities like that still continue today, ruining relationships and friendships all over the place. The media love those kinds of plots, and they keep pushing them out to the public. You just have to see the wild stuff you get on your social media, unfortunately. Chuck Smith tells us that it was a common practice back then for a king who took over the kingdom from his predecessor, for him to also take the king's wives. And in fact, David also took Saul's wives. You can check that out in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 8. So the taking of wives of the predecessor, again, was a part of the succession in the kingdom. I'm not sure if it was the case for all successions or just the hostile ones, as this one certainly was a hostile one. Now, today we see or hear of soldiers raiding villages and towns and then raping the women. That's not too different, I guess. Some of us might ask, why would Ahithophel give Absalom such terrible advice? Well, David Gusick suggests a possible answer when he writes, quote, because it made sense from his own self-interest. Ahithophel had the most to lose if Absalom failed to keep the throne or if David and Absalom reconciled. He would be revealed and rejected as a traitor. End of quote. So Gusick goes on to say, quote, this disgraceful act said a lot about Absalom, who actually did it. It also said a lot about Ahithophel, who must have had a strange sense of satisfaction in seeing David's women violated in a similar way to how his granddaughter Bathsheba was violated by him. Ahithophel shows us the power of bitterness. He was willing to see these women abused, Absalom grievously sin, and the kingdom of Israel suffer greatly, all simply to satisfy his bitter longing for revenge. We need to pause and ask ourselves, are we doing or are we not doing anything still purely out of bitterness? The fact that the women were being used and abused does not detract from the fact that we do not know whether they participated in this willingly or unwillingly. My personal hunch is that with David gone, they likely, being short-sighted, knew what side their bread was buttered on, or would be buttered on from that point forward, and to whom they needed to direct their pleasure towards or for. But there's even more to this story than that, something much more significant in my view. Gusick goes on, quote, this disgraceful incident also shows that God kept his promises. I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, before the sun. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 11 and 12. Now, who could be a closer neighbor than a son? God will indeed keep his promises, those that are for our good, as well as those that are not so good for people or ourselves. We tend to pursue the former, and we don't even preach or talk or teach anything about the latter. Woe to us and those we don't share the truth with. We also notice that Absalom relied on Ahithophel and Hushai and not the Ark of God for advice. The Ark of God, which he had right there with him in Jerusalem. Religious observance meant nothing to him any longer. Many a times, even today, politicians pay lip service to faith-related matters. But when they're on top, they stop. All you have to do is look at some of our, sadly to say, Roman Catholic members of Congress who know what they should be voting with respect to abortion and other things, and they don't. They promise to be good Catholics in their positions, but that's all gone now because it isn't convenient. So it is with many in our midst. Christians, beware. Next time, we'll learn about a plot to actually attack David Find out who that came from. Join us for that. In the meantime, I would encourage you to share these videos. Just pass them on social media or however you want to do it. Keep on studying the Word of God yourself. Write to us with your comments, your questions, your thoughts. And above all, we would really appreciate it if you would like our video right here on YouTube, and also if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. Have a great